The courtroom at the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., was steeped in tense silence as Karoline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, stepped through the heavy wooden doors. In her hand, she gripped the leash of Brano, a German shepherd with a long, jagged scar running down his left flank. Every eye in the room turned toward her as she made her way to the center, her steps both hesitant and resolute. Brano, calm yet vigilant, paced steadily beside her, his ears perked, ready to detect anything unusual. Karoline was no ordinary witness. As the White House spokesperson, she was present to oversee the trial of Victor Grayson, a former Pentagon official suspected of spying for China. Her role was to ensure sensitive information remained protected, but there was an underlying question: could she uncover something others had missed? Judge Daniel Harper, a seasoned legal veteran with silver-streaked hair, leaned forward slightly, observing Karoline with a piercing gaze. He understood the gravity of this case. It wasn't just about espionage, it was a conspiracy against President Donald Trump's administration. Across the courtroom, Victor Grayson sat at the defendant's table, eerily composed, almost smug. At 50, he had once been an unremarkable military analyst, but now he stood accused of selling national security secrets to a foreign power. Grayson had been arrested following a tip that he had attended a clandestine meeting with Chinese operatives. Yet, his defense was formidable: no concrete physical evidence, no confession, and a legal team ready to dismantle every accusation. Then, something unexpected happened. As Karoline took her seat, her sharp green eyes met Grayson's. Her fingers trembled slightly as she made a subtle gesture, a secret signal known only to those with rigorous training. It was the cue she had coordinated with Brano, a dog trained by the Trump administration to detect listening devices and unusual behavior. Only two figures in the room recognized the signal: Brano and Judge Harper. Bruno's reaction was instantaneous. As Karoline's fingers tapped lightly on the table, a silent command, the dog's body stiffened. His ears pricked, muscles coiled like a spring ready to launch. A low growl rumbled from his chest, a sound both warning and menacing. His golden brown eyes locked onto Grayson, unwavering, piercing. The reaction sent a chill through the courtroom, murmurs rippling through the onlookers. Bruno's behavior wasn't just that of a trained dog, it was something deeper, almost primal. Judge Harper slammed his gavel against the bench, the sound echoing like thunder. "Court is recessed for 15 minutes, he declared, his voice carrying a rare urgency. Prosecutor Anna Reynolds shot him a questioning look, but Harper didn't respond. Instead, he glanced at Karoline, who stood beside Brano as if the dog were her steadiest anchor. Something significant had just happened, and he needed time to process it before proceeding. As the courtroom emptied, Harper remained in his seat, his mind racing. In all his years on the bench, he had never seen a trained dog react with such uncanny certainty. What had Brano detected? And more crucially, what did it mean for the case? Outside in the hallway, Karoline knelt beside Brano, her hand gripping his fur tightly. Margaret Leavitt, her mother, bent down beside her, brushing her daughter's hair with trembling hands. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she whispered. Karoline didn't answer, but she didn't need to. Her grip on Brano tightened, her body pressing against the dog as if seeking comfort. A few steps away, FBI agent Ethan Brooks observed the scene. A seasoned investigator, Brooks had a keen instinct that had cracked numerous high-stakes cases. Now, that instinct told him the courtroom incident was a turning point. He approached Judge Harper, his voice low. "I'd bet my badge Brano picked up something off about Grayson." Judge Harper exhaled slowly, his deep blue eyes narrowing, cutting through to the truth. "Then we need to figure out what it is," he replied, his tone unshakably resolute. In the defendant's private room, Victor Grayson sat across from his attorney, Thomas Reed. Alone now, the smugness on Grayson's face melted away, replaced by a cold, calculating edge. His fingers drummed incessantly on the wooden table as he replayed the courtroom moment in his mind. Karoline hadn't said a word, but that dog, had reacted. "She knows something," Grayson muttered under his breath. Reed raised an eyebrow. What? Grayson forced a strange smile. Nothing, he said, but his mind was in chaos. That damn dog. He hadn't counted on it being a problem. But now, Grayson realized, Brano might be the key to unraveling his entire scheme. As the 15-minute recess neared its end, Judge Harper adjusted his robe and took a deep breath. He didn't believe in coincidences, and his gut told him Brano had just handed them a critical clue. It was time to dig deeper. For the first time since the trial began, he felt the momentum shifting. The courtroom buzzed with tension as everyone returned to their places. Victor Grayson, the former Pentagon official accused of espionage, sat motionless at the defendant's table, his eyes now betraying a flicker of unease. Prosecutor Anna Reynolds prepared to resume questioning, but all attention zeroed in on Karoline Leavitt and Brano, the German shepherd with the long scar along his left flank. Brano was no ordinary dog. He had been specially trained by the Trump administration to detect listening devices, explosives, and erratic behavior. His presence at the trial wasn't just symbolic, it was a top-secret security measure that Karoline had insisted upon. Anna Reynolds stepped forward, her voice sharp yet composed. Your Honor, we have evidence that Mr. Grayson communicated with Chinese operatives for months, passing classified Pentagon information. She presented a stack of documents. Thomas Reed shot to his feet. Objection. This is speculation, Your Honor, he said smoothly. No recordings, no photos, just testimony from unreliable sources. Karoline, seated near the prosecution table to oversee sensitive information, tilted her head, studying Grayson. Something was off. The way he clenched his fists when Reed mentioned recordings, it was a telltale sign of stress, one she had seen many times in tense White House briefings. Without hesitation, she tapped her fingers lightly on the table, a secret signal she and Brano had practiced for years. Bruno's response was immediate. He sprang to his feet, ears erect, nose sniffing the air rapidly. Then, with laser focus, he bolted toward the defendant's table, sniffing around Grayson's chair. A low growl rumbled from his chest, his golden-brown eyes fixed on the area beneath the table. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, whispers spreading like waves. Judge Harper banged his gavel, his face stern. What's happening, Ms. Leavitt? He demanded, his voice commanding. Karoline stood, her tone calm but cutting. Your Honor, Brano is trained to detect listening devices. I believe there's something in this room we haven't seen. Ethan Brooks, stationed near the door, moved in swiftly. Kneeling beside Brano, he followed the dog's lead. Under Grayson's table, he found a small black device, no bigger than a coin, blinking with a faint red light. A listening device, Brooks announced, his voice ringing through the courtroom's dead silence. Grayson paled, his hands visibly trembling. Judge Harper slammed his gavel once more. Bailiff, secure the defendant. Judge Harper slammed his gavel harder than ever. Court is adjourned. I'm ordering a full sweep of this area, he announced, his cold gaze locked on Grayson. Anna Reynolds glanced at Karoline with admiration, while Thomas Reed whispered urgently to his client. Karoline stood still, her hand resting gently on Bruno's head, her eyes filled with quiet confidence. As the sound of the gavel echoed, the security team at the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., sprang into action. FBI agent Ethan Brooks, still holding the tiny listening device found under Grayson's table, passed it to a technician. Turning to Judge Harper, he said firmly, we need to analyze this immediately. Brooks, a seasoned FBI agent with years of experience in counterespionage, studied the device and muttered, I've seen this type before, Chinese tech, no doubt. His partner, Olivia Bennett, stepped up beside Karoline, who remained calm next to Brano. Olivia's voice was soft but serious. Miss Leavitt, did you notice anything unusual before you signaled? Karoline gave a small nod, keeping her hand on Brano to keep him steady. Grayson tensed up when the prosecutor mentioned recordings. His reaction didn't match the confidence he had earlier, she said. Her tone was composed, shaped by years of handling high-pressure situations as a White House press secretary. Olivia exchanged a glance with Ethan. Body language, she whispered. He's hiding something. Anna Reynolds approached, holding her files tightly, determination flashing in her eyes. If that device was active, it could have recorded everything in the courtroom, including something Grayson didn't want us to hear. Ethan shook his head. A listening device alone won't prove he was spying for China unless it contains direct evidence. Anna turned to Karoline. Are you sure Bruno only reacted to this device? Karoline gave a faint smile. Bruno is trained to detect threats, devices, explosives, even suspicious behavior. If he reacted, it means something's not right. Meanwhile, outside the courtroom, a surprising witness stepped forward. Helen Parker, a retired Pentagon employee who once worked under Grayson, approached Ethan. Her voice was steady. I heard about the dog. I have information. I saw Grayson meeting someone in the Pentagon parking lot. He handed something over. I don't know what it was, but I remember the other car's license plate. It started with XJR. Ethan's eyes lit up. That's a lead, he said, writing it down quickly. Helen nodded. I didn't say anything before because I was scared. But if he's really a spy, I can't stay silent anymore. As security teams searched the courtroom, Karoline stood in the hallway with Bruno, gently stroking his fur. She could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a legal case, it was a fight to protect national security. The White House had trusted her with this responsibility. Bruno looked up at her, his deep brown eyes filled with loyalty. She whispered, "We'll find the truth, buddy." But deep down, Karoline knew Grayson wasn't working alone. And the listening device? It was just the beginning. Inside the FBI's temporary office, the tech team worked on analyzing the device. The room smelled of sanitizer, and the air buzzed with the hum of equipment. Bruno, the German shepherd with the long scar on his left flank, sat nearby. He had once been among the best K9s in national security. He had been trained to detect threats no human could see. The scar on his body was proof of his bravery. He had tackled a bomb-carrying suspect during a raid, saving lives but suffering serious injuries. After that, he had been considered unfit for service. But Karoline refused to let him go. She made him her partner, her protector, her most trusted ally. Ethan glanced at Bruno, then at Karoline through the glass door. That dog isn't just a pet, he muttered to Olivia. He's our secret weapon. Olivia nodded. And Karoline knows exactly how to use it. If Grayson is really a spy, Bruno will be the one to expose him. Bruno had been on the verge of retirement after his injury, until Rachel Morgan, an expert animal trainer with the National Security Unit, stepped in. She had spent years training animals for high-risk missions. She believed Bruno still had a job to do. And now, it seemed, his most important mission had just begun. When Rachel Morgan heard about Bruno's case, she fought to keep him. She believed his sharp mind and unwavering loyalty were still valuable. Now, at the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., she was about to be proven right. Karoline Leavitt stood in the FBI's temporary office, gripping Bruno's leash tightly. The German shepherd, with a long scar on his left side, sat calmly beside her, ears alert, golden brown eyes scanning the room. Rachel knelt in front of Bruno, speaking softly but firmly. Hey, Bruno. You're special, aren't you? Trained to catch what humans miss. Bruno stayed still, watching her. His presence was steady, not threatening. Want to test his skills? Rachel asked, looking at Karoline. Karoline nodded. He reacted in the courtroom. If there's anything else off, he'll find it. Rachel gave a small command. Search. Bruno rose immediately, sniffing the air. He moved slowly across the room, then stopped near a chair. Caroline's heart pounded as he pressed his nose to the floor. Rachel turned to Caroline. "If you're ready, give the signal." Caroline tapped her fingers lightly on the table, the secret cue she and Bruno had trained with. Bruno reacted instantly. Lowering his head, he stepped carefully toward the chair. As his nose brushed the leg, he froze, ears perked. A low growl rumbled from his throat. Ethan Brooks, standing nearby, rushed over. He knelt and found a tiny object hidden under the chair cushion. It wasn't a listening device, but a miniature signal transmitter. "This is encrypted tech," Ethan said, astonished. "It could be sending data without anyone noticing." Prosecutor Anna Reynolds entered, holding a stack of files. Her eyes widened at the discovery. "This is the evidence we need," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. If Grayson used this in the courtroom, every lie he told could have been sent straight to his accomplices. Ethan nodded, but remained cautious. "We need to analyze its data. If it connects back to China, Grayson has no way out." Caroline stood still, stroking Bruno's head. Since she had taken him in, at the recommendation of the Trump administration, she knew he wasn't just a dog. He was essential to national security. Bruno looked up at her as if he understood his role. In the days that followed, Caroline and Bruno became inseparable. He wasn't there to help her overcome trauma, he was her second set of eyes and ears, always alert to hidden dangers. One afternoon, in Rachel's office, Caroline watched Bruno perform a search command. "Good job," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan turned, surprised at the rare moment of emotion. Caroline gave a faint smile, her eyes filled with trust. Rachel placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder and whispered, "She trusts him." And sometimes, trust is the first step to uncovering the truth. Tension filled the courtroom as the trial restarted. The gallery was packed with journalists, officials, and legal experts, all waiting for the next twist in one of Washington, D.C.'s most high-profile cases. Victor Grayson sat at the defendant's table, his confidence replaced with unease. His fingers tapped the polished wood in a slow rhythm. Karoline Leavitt, White House press secretary, stood near the prosecution, gripping Bruno's leash. The German shepherd sat alert, his golden-brown eyes locked on Grayson. Occasionally, his nose twitched, as if catching a familiar scent. "Rise," the clerk announced. Judge Daniel Harper entered, his black robe fluttering as he took his seat. His sharp eyes swept the room before briefly pausing on Caroline and Bruno. "I've reviewed reports from the National Security Unit," Harper said. "The dog stays." Murmurs spread across the courtroom. Some nodded in approval, others whispered in discontent. Grayson's attorney, Thomas Reed, smoothed his tie and stood. "Your Honor, we argue that having a large German shepherd in the courtroom is unfair to my client. The jury may react emotionally, putting him at a disadvantage." Anna Reynolds immediately countered. "Your Honor, Bruno isn't a decoration. He's a government-trained security dog. His presence ensures the integrity of this trial, especially in a case tied to national security." Harper remained impassive. "The dog stays." Reed pursed his lips but didn't push further. He glanced at Grayson, who sat still, his face unreadable. The prosecution presented its case. Anna Reynolds described a years-long espionage network leaking Pentagon data to China. Helen Parker, a former Pentagon employee, took the stand. Her hands trembled as she spoke. "I saw Grayson exchange documents with a stranger in the parking lot," she said. "He was sneaky, like he knew someone was watching." Caroline listened, gripping Bruno's leash tighter, her eyes never leaving Grayson. Then, the pivotal moment arrived. "Miss Leavitt," Anna said gently, "we know you're not a direct witness, but you and Bruno played a key role in this case. Can you explain what happened?" Caroline didn't look at Anna. Her gaze stayed locked on Grayson. Slowly, she tapped her fingers on the stand, the secret signal. Bruno reacted instantly. His nose twitched. Then, without hesitation, he bolted toward the defendant's table, a low growl rising from his throat. The courtroom froze. Judge Harper leaned forward. Bruno pressed against Karoline's leg, sensing the weight of the moment. Karoline bent down, gripping his fur. Then, after a long pause, she slowly raised her hand, pointing directly at Victor Grayson. Grayson's face didn't change. But in his eyes, for the first time, there was a flicker of fear. His jaw clenched, betraying him. The truth was coming out. Thomas Reed, the defense attorney, sprang to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor," he said urgently. "This is baseless. Miss Leavitt isn't a direct witness, and pointing like this is unreliable." Judge Daniel Harper raised a hand, cutting him off. "Objection overruled," he stated firmly. "The jury will assess the reliability of this information themselves." Anna pressed on, her voice steady. "Miss Leavitt, did Mr. Grayson do anything to raise your suspicion?" Karoline didn't respond verbally. Instead, she made a subtle hand gesture, the secret signal Bruno knew well. The German shepherd reacted instantly, ears pricking up, muscles taut, a low growl rumbling from his chest. It wasn't aggressive, but it was a clear warning. A ripple of unease swept through the courtroom. Judge Harper leaned forward, brows furrowed. Thomas Reed jumped up again, his voice sharp. "Your Honor, I object. This is cheap theatrics." Harper ignored him, his focus locked on Bruno. The dog was completely still, attention fixated on Grayson, as if sensing something unseen. The reaction mirrored the first time Bruno had locked eyes with Grayson, instantaneous, unmistakable. A thought flashed through Harper's mind. He turned to Anna, his voice low and deliberate. "Miss Reynolds, has this dog encountered the defendant before?" Anna hesitated. "Not to my knowledge, Your Honor." Harper shifted his gaze to Grayson. "Mr. Grayson, have you ever had contact with this dog?" For the first time, Grayson showed real emotion. His fingers, which had been tapping steadily, clenched into fists. He remained silent. Anna's eyes widened, as if realizing something critical. She turned and whispered urgently to Ethan Brooks. Without hesitation, Ethan bolted from the courtroom. "What's going on?" Reed snapped, his patience fraying. Anna straightened, her expression unreadable. "Your Honor, I request a brief recess. We may have just uncovered new evidence tied to this case." Judge Harper studied her for a long moment before nodding. 15-minute recess. As the courtroom emptied, murmurs spread like wildfire. Speculation ignited fiercely. What had Bruno recognized in Victor Grayson? And if so, where did it stem from? The pressure mounted on the prosecution. Victor Grayson had been linked to Chinese espionage, but the case risked collapse without stronger evidence. What no one anticipated was that the key to unraveling it all wouldn't come from testimony, but from the dog. The next morning, crisp air enveloped Washington, D.C., as the prosecution, led by Anna Reynolds, presented a new motion. "Your Honor," Anna said confidently, "we've analyzed the signal transmitter Bruno found. Its data points to a specific location, an abandoned warehouse in rural Virginia. We request a 24-hour recess to investigate further. We believe this is the final piece to close this case." Thomas Reed objected immediately. "Your Honor, this is just a delay tactic. My client has been thoroughly questioned, and there's no clear evidence." Ethan Brooks, seated near the prosecution table, leaned in and whispered to Anna. "I've seen this pattern before. If Grayson has a hidden base, everything he's concealed will be there." Judge Harper nodded, his expression stern. "Motion granted. Court recesses for 24 hours. By early afternoon, the investigation team reached the abandoned warehouse in rural Virginia. The stillness was eerie, broken only by the whisper of wind through the trees. Thick dust coated the porch floor, but faint footprints led to the back door, suggesting recent activity. Bruno reacted first. His ears shot up, nose sniffing intensely, body rigid, tail stiff. A low growl escaped him as they crossed the threshold, his eyes sharp with alertness. "Something's off here," Ethan muttered. "Bruno knows there's something inside." Inside, the warehouse was barren, just a table, a folding cot and a pile of empty food cans. But then, Ethan noticed something odd. The wooden floor near the back wall had an unnatural seam, a faint indentation that seemed out of place. He tapped it. Hollow. "There's something under here," he said firmly. With swift precision, the team pried up the plank. What emerged chilled them all, a narrow staircase spiraling down to a hidden basement. The air grew cold and damp as they descended, dim light revealing a horrifying scene, old electronics, computer hard drives, tattered documents. In the far corner, a small, tightly locked safe. Bruno strained at his leash, whining, as if sensing the gravity of the discovery. Ethan rushed forward, using a tool to break the safe's lock. Inside was an encrypted hard drive and a stack of papers, code names, dates, and transactions detailing military information transfers to China. "This is it," Ethan whispered, his voice trembling. "We've got direct evidence against Grayson." Back at the federal courthouse, news of the find spread rapidly. The courtroom was packed as Anna Reynolds prepared to deliver a decisive blow to Victor Grayson. Judge Harper allowed the new evidence, the hard drive and documents, into the record, alongside data from the signal transmitter Bruno had uncovered. Anna's voice was sharp as steel. "Mr. Grayson, how do you explain classified Pentagon documents found in a warehouse directly tied to you?" For the first time, Grayson showed panic. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. Anna advanced. "Your fingerprints are on the safe. Your tire tracks match those outside the warehouse. And most importantly, this hard drive's data will expose your entire espionage network." Her words landed like a boulder. Grayson's carefully constructed calm began to crumble. Thomas Reed whispered something urgently in his ear, but Grayson was visibly cornered. And then, it happened again. Bruno, lying at Caroline's feet, suddenly lifted his head. His eyes narrowed at Grayson. His fur bristled. A deep growl rumbled from his chest. The room fell silent. The German shepherd stepped forward slowly, gaze locked on the defendant. A look of pure recognition. Grayson flinched. The man who had maintained arrogance throughout the trial was now sweating, hands gripping the table's edge. He turned to Reed, muttering something frantic, then whispered, "I want to change my plea." A roar of commotion erupted. Harper's eyes darkened. "Mr. Grayson, are you saying you wish to plead guilty?" The room held its breath. Grayson exhaled shakily. "Yes." The trial ended abruptly, sending shockwaves across the nation. Victor Grayson was sentenced to life without parole, his fate sealed. But the true hero of the case wasn't just the lawyers or investigators. It was Karoline Leavitt who trusted her instincts, and Bruno, the dog who safeguarded national security. After the verdict, Karoline stroked Bruno's head, whispering, "Thank you." Bruno wagged his tail, pressing against her, proof of an unbreakable bond, ready to face darkness, no matter how deep.